So let me introduce our two distinguished guests here. Garr Reynolds is an internationally acclaimed communications consultant and author of the best-selling presentation.
You're reading that.
I am, because there's no way I can remember all of this and get it in my head. So Garr's approach to communication takes the principles and lessons from the Zen arts and from the natural world in Japan to reveal simple, concrete tips for communicating and living better. That's pretty cool. I like that part. His fresh approach has inspired millions to communicate more clearly, creatively, and visually. So I think most of you at some point have read Presentation Zen. I've got those books up here, so please feel free at some point to come and check them out over here. There's some other materials that we have, I think a video, the bento box set that you had, some sketchbooks, and I believe we might be raffling those off later. So if you didn't get a chance to submit your business card back in the raffle area in the back, do so before we end this, because you'll get a chance to win some of those books and possibly some of the books from Nancy. So at one point, I think Garr was mentioned in 2011 that you're one of the 100 most influential people on the internet. Pretty cool that we have him here today to hear from. So Nancy Duarte here is our CEO here at Duarte. She's one of the principals. Some of you who don't know Nancy that well might think that if I'm Michael Duarte and that's Nancy Duarte, what's going on there? Nancy is not my wife. I just want to make sure we're clear with that, because Mark over here might find a little bit odd if that was the case. So Mark and Nancy are married. So Nancy is a communication expert who has been featured in Fortune, Forbes, Fast Company, Wired, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the LA Times, and on CNN. When I read this, Nancy, I was like, oh, really? It seems like it's just kind of flown by, all of that. But as a persuasion specialist, Nancy developed a unique methodology which applies storytelling and visual thinking principles to business communications that shift audience beliefs and behaviors. One of the cool things about Duarte is that we are the 5th largest female employer here in the Bay Area because of Nancy as the CEO. I think that's pretty cool. Chick power. Exactly. And I have 3 daughters, and someday I want them to be like their Aunt Nancy. So Nancy's won several prestigious awards for communications and entrepreneurship. Recently, she was named Entrepreneur of the Year by the University of Southern Mississippi here in 2013, earlier this year. So very cool to see that. Nancy has 3 grown children who walk in their destiny, and a husband over there who has loved her for over 30 years. She has 2 grand dogs named Bear and Necessity. So with all of this about these 2 great people we're going to talk to for a bit of time, why don't we say, why don't we just give a warm round of applause for Garr and Nancy.
We should do a mic test.
Oh, yes. We're on.
Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
It's okay? Because I can't hear myself. But.
Go a little closer.
No, Hikoemasu ka? 1, 2, 3, 4, go. That's for the Japanese in here.
Sí,
Very
sí.
good. Yes, you like that.
Okay?
Muy bien.
Now, before we get going, I had a lot of questions that people have submitted, both over the internet, some that were submitted here just today. But I had one question that I think we'd all like to hear about, and that's simply, how did we both meet?
Oh, that's a good one. You want to tell that story? Do you know the year? It was 2000.
It was 2007. And it's funny because
not 7. It was
2006.
I looked on my blog. That's a good thing about blogs. You can go back and see when things happen. I think it was actually
2006.
6 or even.
Yeah, I was working really hard in the business and not on it. And I hired a president to run the company, and I could, for the first time, look around. And I heard the word blog, but didn't really know what it was. And so I did a find. I did presentation blog. I did a search on that, and his site came up. And I was so excited because I thought somebody else does and loves what I do. So I sent him an email, and the subject line was, "Where have you been all my life?"
I didn't show that to my wife.
So I say we struck up a friendship, and a lot of people don't know the reason I wrote a book. He's the one that made me write a book. So it's weird because you'd think we were kind of competitors, but we're friends. And he sent me a draft of Presentation Zen, and he said, "Nancy, here's what I'm writing. You take everything I left off the table, and you got to write." And then you follow. How are you doing on your book? How are you doing on your book? When's your book going to be done? So I wouldn't have written a book if he hadn't made me.
Yeah, I think that was the end of 2005, actually. I was coming home for Christmas.
So it took me a long
And I went
time.
to your office. It used to be on Castro.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Before,
Yeah.
that was 2 offices ago. So you're just moving up like George Jefferson. It's amazing. Every time I come, it's a different place. But it's just amazing to see the transformation.
Well, and the book's played a big role, so thank you.
And there's something, people still read books, but there's something called a presentation industry. I mean, people before would just say, what, you mean you design PowerPoint decks? And okay, my nephew does that. Anyone can do that. And now we've seen that it's actually an industry, and that it takes concepts and principles, traditional concepts and principles of design and storytelling. So, it's been a big change, and we aren't. I think the spirit is we're not really competitors, but it's more of a harmonious sort of helping kind of thing. So I want to see you and everyone here be very successful. And I think a lot of you are into presentation design or communication training or teaching or something. So I don't see us as competitors. I mean, just like doctors don't go to a conference and think of everyone as being competitors. We're trying to, help people tell their stories. So.
Awesome. I've got a number of questions. that I want to go through, but one that was submitted online. How can we best get buy-in from the corporate world to stop creating crappy presentations and go Zen? I just wanted to say crappy.
Well, I like that. I use that word a lot. But that's the $64 million question, which will date me, I guess. Who understands what that means? 5 people get that. That's the big question. But I actually don't work in corporate so much. I mean, I'm a full-time, college professor. So I work with students. I'm sort of starting I get them a bit younger. And then they'll graduate and face this, and they learned a different way, which is really the old way. So I always call it back to the future, because I learned doing the short form sort of multimedia presentation in the 70s in high school, using 35 millimeter slides, 2 carousels, so you get the beautiful transition, and taking photos. So the slides were expensive. So you really think about what photo you're going to take. You storyboard things, you really think about what you're going to say, and then you would put slides together in a carousel and tell these stories. This was in the 70s, before PowerPoint was invented. So that I come from it at a different angle. Nancy has to deal with the scourge of Microsoft. I'm sorry, it's not Microsoft's fault, but the whole PowerPoint culture. Actually, 2 of my friends. Is Howie here? Okay. He's always here. Rick is in the audience. Yeah.
If you have complaints about PowerPoint, come to them.
Howie, did you invent? Was it word art?
I was related to that.
Yeah. So he's responsible for that.
That's him.
That's his fault.
I think people get really discouraged. I think once they've kind of bought into the Zen approach, they feel like they're raging against a machine to see it perpetuate through the organization of best practices around communication. And I try to encourage people by saying, pick one battle. I think what happens is we get caught up in these skirmishes with this person, that person. Hey, you shouldn't do it that way, you shouldn't do it that way, you shouldn't do it that way. And I think if you pick one really important, really high-stakes presentation, the one where there's 15,000 seats at, at a big conference, or a great big vision piece where your company's going to make or break, or something that's going to really make a really big sale, pick that one and fight hard for that one battle, and then ask for a chance, and then hopefully then that'll start to ripple through. So I would say really focus on who it is that you want to help become a masterful communicator, and pick that one. And it takes a long time to do a really, really good job on a presentation, so you can't possibly do them all as amazing as the one that needs to be done so well, where the outcome is so critical. Pick that one and fight hard, and get people to understand how important it is, and make that a rallying point. And then I think it can kind of become a flashpoint in change in your organization.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Jobs has the famous quote where he says, people who know what they're talking about don't need PowerPoint. And what he meant, he's not having a go at PowerPoint, but what he meant, and I used to work at Apple before I moved back to Japan, our meetings, we never had slides. I mean, meetings are, usually all the rooms were whiteboards all the way around, and that's what Jobs always used, whiteboard, and he was only allowed to use the whiteboard, no one else could touch it. But that was, I think that's public information. He would stand, everyone else sit. We didn't get into that kind of culture, but I know a lot of other companies that's still in Japan where I live. That's the normal thing. Create a deck and just go through a bunch of things. Rather, so I say, I agree with you. Most of the presentations, for example, I'm a college teacher, so I don't use slides. I don't use multimedia too much. I mean, I do show film clips. I have some things, but mainly it's the whiteboard, or we're doing activities, or we're discussing things. It's more fluid. So I don't really think of the teaching as really going through a presentation. There's some of that. And the students do presentations, but they have the whole semester to work on their 30-minute presentation, which may be 10 minutes or 15 minutes more like a sort of a TED-style talk, and then they have to answer a lot of questions. Yeah. But they have the whole semester to work on it, and that's really good training for them. But there's no way a teacher can really pull that off every single day.
Visual conversation. I think you need to think long and hard if PowerPoint's even the right tool. I think we like to see visual conversations where you think through your case and you're about to have a conversation, because most persuasion happens one-on-one, when you can be near somebody and in a room. So it's, like if it's me and you, it's me and two people, is it really putting a little projected medium in between us the right way to connect humanly? Because you work hard to get the right people in the room with you, and then to, have this technology in between you. We really encourage people to have visual conversations. Think through what you want to say, practice visualizing it, and then put a piece of paper in between you and them, or go to the whiteboard, or there's all kinds of iPads where you can draw and project what's being sketched. It just feels like they're helping co-create with you, which makes them have more of an ownership of what you're trying to say. So I completely agree that it's cool to hear that you lecture all day long and you don't even find that slides are always appropriate.
I mean, lecture sounds a negative word. So we call them lectures, and many people do, even in the States too. When I did a thing at Stanford a couple of years ago, and then they told me afterwards that even at Stanford, a lot of the classes are still that very didactic, a lot of lecture things. It's a research university.
Except for JD. Okay, just saying.
Thank you.
No problem.
Well, let me add something onto this, because there was a question that came in that's building off of what you're talking about right now. The question was this: if we differentiate educational and business presentations, what do you think are the most important differences in approaching the design process? So differences between business and educational presentations.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose there is a difference. I mean, I always say in Japanese it's toki to buyin. Every case is
different. And I say something in Spanish.
No, but every case is different. So you can't really say this is the one, this is a different philosophical conversation on the value of college education, or school, I should say. But I won't go there. But because each case is very, very different. But at least in a more traditional university, we have more time. We have a semester. We have 12 weeks or 15 weeks to work on more project-based and go deep. I think it's important to go deeper in things. Many universities I know have this huge syllabus, and so they go, they don't go very deep in anything. Mm-hmm. But I like to go deep in a semester. So maybe in the business world, you have to just go much, much faster. And there's the time constraint, and money is always there. Time is money. Where at least in education, we don't usually have that kind of pressure.
Yeah, we move fast. I think we're a one draft culture. We just have this way, we craft an email and we hit send, we write a tweet, we tweet. So we craft a presentation, we present. And I think what happens is we have to step back and realize most of what we do all day is analytical. And the minute you have to do a presentation, it's creative. And we don't step back and think about, wow, I'm just plowing through my day and I'm treating like this opportunity to communicate something amazing. We just treat it like it's any other kind of analytical task we're doing. And instead, you just got to back up and actually go into a different mode. Sometimes we encourage clients to go into a different room to embrace a different process. I know we both, probably because we both came from the 35mm slide days, we look at the whole instead of the parts. I put all my presentations up on the wall and I arrange and rearrange them. I'm always looking at the whole. I don't sit down and go linear with my slides until I've confirmed with 8 to 10 different ones of my employees that I'm saying the right thing, that it's structured well, it's got the right emotional appeal. And then once it's done and the whole is done, then I sit down and start to create the actual slides.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we always say that sticky notes or whatever you use, but there's something just in being able to see the whole picture. Mm-hmm. And if you visited Pixar or any of those animation studios, I mean, they storyboard things in big, big rooms, and you can zoom in to see the particular, but you can zoom out to see the whole. And that's storytelling, right? I mean, if you listen to Ken Burns talk about what is storytelling, right? Showing the general through the particular, and showing the particular through the general.
Well, something that I'm hearing as you're talking to these questions and providing answers is it sounds like from both of your perspectives that time is really important in the development of a presentation for good communication. Yeah. So I want to ask you a question that's specifically around time. What's your best advice for presentation prep when time is ridiculously short and stakes are high?
That's a good question.
Therapy. I think, I don't know, we talked about kind of what inspires us. I go on walks, I go on hikes, and something happens about the first 30 minutes. I try to solve all the world's problems. Once I have those solved and off my to-do list, then I start to process and anticipate, how would I deal with this? I try to do like scenario. I don't know, my brain, this poor thing, doesn't ever get a rest. So I start to process different things. So I think if you're anticipating things in the future and you try to be constantly give a little bit of brain cycles every day to future-facing kind of things, when you're faced with something, suddenly you've maybe thought through a couple of scenarios or a couple of stories that might apply, or you have this bevy of, kind of tagged or different kinds of ideas because your brain's maybe already gone there, hopefully, especially if it's super high stakes. But the other thing you can do is put a lot of people on it. Put 3-4 people in a room, set up like a war room environment, or we call them boiler rooms too, whatever you want to call them, and just have everyone generate tons of ideas, put all the ideas on the wall, sift through them quickly. I mean, you can just be like, we'll do that here. We'll call them quick storms, and we'll get a few people in a room, quick storm, all these perspectives of ways you never would have thought of approaching it, blah, 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 blah. And then you leave with this basket full of ideas, and all you got to do is go back to your desk and sort them. And then you at least, and then kickstarts your creativity too. I don't know.
Yeah, it is easier putting, it's not intuitive. The intuitive thing, or at least the habit, is to just open a PowerPoint or whatever. It's maybe counterintuitive in our culture to turn off the computer, and because you say, well, I only have 12 hours until this is due. But to take that hour or so to get off the grid and be creative, work in a team, or work by yourself. But constraints is a good thing. So, it's just, when is it? So the presentation is tomorrow. Okay, well that means then, yes, I would like to do this beautiful, cinematic thing, but that's not going to happen. Let's say you're just an individual. And you could do that if you had more time, but you don't have time. So that's actually liberating in a way, because, okay, this is what I can do.
Focus on the work.
You could do like Kawasaki always does his 10 slides thing. He just does 10 things. And like a top 10 list. But you figure it out. But you don't complain about constraints. You don't say, oh, I wish I had more time, because you don't. And once you do that, it's sort of liberating.
That's cool. It's almost a creative opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, my mind is in and out.
Yeah, I think the idea of constraints is important. It's something that I've been reading about online, about people that once you have your constraints, then you actually can be innovative, because you know your limits and what can you do creative within those limits.
But the key is to know, and it's, not knowing is where the anxiety comes.
Yeah.
So how much time, what is the budget? If you don't know those things, then it's very, you have a lot of anxiety about that. But knowing them, then it kind of frees things up. And actually it's liberating, because, okay, I'm not going to do a big cinematic thing with expensive photography. I'll just do a whiteboard thing.
Yeah.
Here's another question that came here from today, and it sort of builds on what we've already talked about, but it's focused on maybe smaller businesses. So both your books make an excellent case for high production values. How does a small business, maybe even a sole proprietor, approach this kind of work with a very limited budget?
Well, a limited budget doesn't constrain your creative. I might come in, and I apologize. I think a limited budget should constrain your creativity. And I think what happens a lot of times is we go for the first most obvious idea when we're trying to come up with ideas for things. We'll use a handshake to mean partnership. We'll use a target to mean, we're going to hit our target, whatever. So first off, don't go for the first most obvious idea. And then there are stock houses that sell images for under $10 each. So don't go to the stock house and do. My microphone is terrible. Sorry, I could probably just shout. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, but then
Is that less annoying?
because I can't use my mic.
Okay.
Then I have to do all Steve Ballmer and just shout.
I'm so
I have a
sorry
mic. He doesn't need a
about the
mic.
technical problems. Maybe both will happen. So I think the big thing is your own imagination, because it really isn't that much of a price constraint. You can do a slide deck for under $100, and but your imagination is what will make it. So a lot of people will go up to something like iStock and do the word partnership, and that's what all the other hundreds of small businesses are doing. They're going out and doing a find on the word partnership or a Google search on that word. But if you could sit and actually think about, what about this partnership? What about this sales call I'm making makes this partnership amazing? Like, is this partnership amazing because we're alike? Is it amazing because we're different? Are we like two peas in a pod? How different is that metaphor than Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire? Or is this partnership like salt and pepper? I put a little salt, the partner puts a little salt, and this other thing becomes more savory because of our partnership. There's so many ways to make things different, even metaphorically, that only comes from the human imagination, that no search engine could pull up for you. So how much do you care about your small business? And then, yeah, the images may be more, but you know what, I hand draw stuff, and I can't draw that great. But I do this thing where I'll hand draw and things, and I scan it in, and I hand draw the next thing and scan it in, and people kind of like that too. So not everything has to be quite as polished as you think it may need to be.
Yeah, I saw a good talk in Paris on, the guy was talking about creativity, and he drew his things out. I have a sketchbook, and he used my sketchbook for that, and then drew these little, pictures of things, and then he scanned those, and then inverted them so that it was not black on, became white on black rather than the other way around. And it was different, and it was sketchy, and he was talking about creativity and all that stuff, so it worked for him, and the budget for that was basically zero.
Scanning it in.
And it was different. Actually used his iPhone. The iPhone is like a scanner now. I mean, it worked, and then he would sharpen it in Photoshop.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we got a bunch more questions here that we want to go through. Here's one that I think is sort of a bigger picture question around individuals, I would say. So what skills and experience constitute a communications expert? Loaded question, I suppose.
Yeah, you can't get you can get a degree in communications.
Yeah.
Actually, my wife, I don't know if she's still here.
Yeah, she's beautiful.
Her degree is from Chico State. Anyone else from Chico State?
Like half my company.
Yeah. And communication design, I think, is the name of the degree, which I think is a great degree because it's not just, it's writing, it's storytelling, it's graphic design, but it's not just graphic design, it's all of those things. And people like George Lucas and Martin Scorsese are saying that, English class, you should take English out of the English class and put it in a communication class because they're really talking about communication. And we shouldn't just be limiting it to, writing, which is extremely important, and visual storytelling and other forms of storytelling and media. But why don't we learn how to be great communicators? So it doesn't really matter the degree so much, but I think those kinds of degrees, though, that are more holistic and look at many different things. We still talk about, my undergraduate degree was in philosophy, which is every mother's dream, right? My son, the philosopher. And I couldn't see where that was going to go, but it turns out it was really, I'm really glad that I did that because philosophy was about reading a lot and writing a lot and arguing a lot. And those things will take you far in life, actually.
Well, your work comes across as philosophical. You're a contemplative, thoughtful kind of guy.
Tell that to my wife.
Okay. She and I will talk later. That's cool. I can't remember.
Yeah, well, no, I was just saying, speaking about Aristotle, so that's, when I was 19 years old and studying Aristotle and about persuasion, which is really about storytelling in a way. And just, the way Plato would use it, using allegory and all that. And it was a very visual type of language, and that's over 2,500 years ago.
Do you want the question again?
Oh, I think I remember it
Okay.
now. I think, too, for communications, and you mentioned the visual storytelling, which is such a kind of a big word right now, but I look at visual storytelling as almost like a little Venn diagram. Like, there's visual, there's story, and there's telling. And so I think visual mastery is a big part of communication, storytelling, and understanding how to use story persuasively. Because if you're trying to communicate, you're getting someone to try to do something. And I think we just had a whole conversation about persuasion is such a dirty word, but I'm telling you, if your company is going to tank and die in 18 months and you need your employees to do stuff, you better persuade them, to get them there. So you have to communicate with them kind of through story. And then there's the telling part, which is the delivery. That can be, the verbal delivery, but it could be email, it could be everything. And I think you have to understand all three of those and kind of where they dovetail is what makes you a really great communication expert.
Yeah, but it is a good question, expert. It's one of those things. There is no, it's not like being a doctor or a nurse. There's no certification, so.
Maybe we should start.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, let me add something on it really quick because I think there's another side of communication. We think about communication most of the time as us saying something to somebody else. Mm-hmm. How important is listening as to being a communications expert?
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
How important was it?
I wasn't listening.
No, I mean, listening is everything, right? It's a cliche to say, but it's really true. And I miss so much. I'm missing a lot now because I have jet lagged out beyond my.
He's a little pooped out.
But no, it's everything. I think. I mean, all the books say that, but it's really true. The best communicators, I think, are the best listeners, and they make the best salespeople.
Yeah, and you gotta listen empathetically, like, and that's one thing you should do as you're practicing and to prepare your presentation is think about how they're going to process it from their perspective. Kind of take a minute in your shoes and try to picture them listening to your talk and how they're going to react to it, because it's really important that you think about it from that perspective. And another thing that I think is listening is visually processing the audience. Like if they're kind of like listen to that, okay? Like I heard a story one time of this guy who the audience, he could, like, at least he was bright enough to read the audience, but he gets 10 minutes in his talk, he could tell everybody's just checked out, would rather be somewhere else, and it was a keynote talk, and so he said, you know what? I blew it, and I feel really bad because I can tell nobody here is really interested. If I give you back this hour, would you ask the organizers to bring me back again? And he got a standing ovation. Next year, he came back, and he got another standing ovation for the actual talk. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting how you could read the language and see if they really are that interested in it or not.
Absolutely, unless you turn out all the lights like we have here, and then we can't see
Speaker
anybody.
falls asleep.
Which is, the lights are on us. But there's you never know where you'll find inspiration. There's what's the Steve Martin biography that came out a few years ago? You know Steve Martin? Does anyone know?
Comedian, yeah.
Comedian. Well, he's more than that, but he was talking about in his career, he went into a room and the room wasn't dark, and he knew that he would bomb. In comedy, this is performance, the room has to be dark. Because everything in comedy, type of performance, is the audience needs to feed off each other.
Yeah.
But they somehow, in performance, you need a dark room for people to have permission to whatever. But he was right, like in a TED-style talk, those type of events, because I do a lot of consulting on TEDx events around the world, this is Bono stuff. And it's got to be dark, like we did it here. For that type of event, it just changes the dynamic. I mean, it's a little thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting.
Okay, here's one one that was submitted, but actually is something that I think about a lot too, based on the types of people I get to work with. But here's the question. I struggle with applying your concepts when it comes to presenting to engineers. I would add in analytical scientists, researchers. In my current role, I have to make presentations to engineers, and often they're looking for details, and more details. I've tried using less words and more images and numbers with this type of audience, and I feel it is not as accepted as if I throw up a plot and a bunch of bullet points. I almost feel that engineers don't trust the content of the slides. It's a long question. If they look too polished. What are your thoughts on presenting to engineers when you need to communicate a large number of specific details?
Yeah, so maybe you don't present that way at all. I mean, you don't use slides at all. This is something I often hear. And in Japan, of course, that's our typical ways to put lots of dense stuff up for a technical audience, because that's what they're used to, and then they won't trust, which is a very emotional thing. They'll say emotion is not important in presentation. And damn it, it's not important in communication. So they get very emotional about the fact that you're trying to actually use emotion. It's ironic. Yeah. So maybe you just don't go with slides at all, and instead you have handouts, which could be dense, and you use a whiteboard and you explain things. So the density, this is what we do in Japan. We do have all that stuff. It is there, so we're not hiding anything. But to have a conversation about things, I need to point things out. So I might explain, or have the client explain things on the whiteboard, and then the people in the audience can go to page 47 and have it all there. There are many different workarounds, but it's not my method, but to say, a lot of times people say your method is pretty pictures and a few words. No, that's not what it's all about. It's about knowing each situation and trying to be as clear and as simple, which doesn't mean stupid, it means but as simple as possible in that situation. And if you think your audience is going to have an emotional response to you not using that kind of dense material, then put that dense material in there. But still try to be as simple and as clear as possible for the actual communication, verbal communication part.
Yeah. I think people think their careers are at risk if they don't look smart and put tons of data in there. One thing you could do would be to create kind of like, I don't know if you guys are old enough as I am to remember the old annual reports. And when they were in print, the front would be this glossy, highly inspirational story, and then the bulk of it would be this dense report. And so you can do the same thing with your presentation, where maybe you do a high level, tell them the meaning in the data. And then the backup material is the dense kind of report. So you could say, hey, look, here are the findings, here's the meaning, and then you could hand out the report in the meeting, let them look through it, and then come to some conclusions if it's a meeting. If it's a formal talk, you do need to know who is in the audience, because you can't pull on an enormous amount of emotional appeal if you're talking to bioengineers. Like, they know how to feel, so they do like to feel, and you can tell some stories, but it's like a thin veneer. It's like that little coating of sugar that helps the medicine go down, the little pill, So you do wrap it in a human flavor, but you do definitely need to prove that you know what you're talking about, because that's what they came to hear, is some statistics. You can display them really well, but you've got to include the statistics wrapped in story.
Yeah, I mean, and the more fundamental question is, why are we here? I mean, why are we having a talk then? If it's just to give you lots of details, that's better to read that. It's faster and more convenient. We can save CO2 and all that stuff. So why are we really here? And we don't ask ourselves that often. A lot of times it's just, it'd be better to cancel the meeting and do it in a...
And send out a document.
And do it in a different way. But Hans Rosling, everyone knows Hans Rosling, the Swedish doctor, medical doctor, and he uses Gapminder. He co-invented gapminder.org, I think.
Google bottom.
Yeah, it's Google now, but what isn't? But that's a lot of data. So the idea that, no, you can't have data and story and be interesting at the same time. Well, I'm not saying use Gapminder, but that is tons of data, and it's interesting, and the presenter, who is a doctor, but he's very engaged and a little bit wacky, and that's okay.
You can go to TED.com and do Hans Rosling, and it'll come up. It's amazing.
Yeah, if you didn't hear Nancy, go to TED.com, look up Hans Rosling. It's one of the most fascinating talks I've ever seen on TED, which leads me to a follow-on question. Since we're talking about TED, this question came in, and I'll just append it a little bit. It says, name your 3 favorite TED Talks that show great communication and why. But why don't we just have each of you share your favorite?
What a segue.
Sometimes I can do this.
Well, the most popular one, as as many of you know, is Sir Ken Robinson's first talk in 2007, I think. Might be wrong with the year. And that's one with, he didn't use media at all, multimedia. But it still is very visual. He himself is very visual. But I can't say, be like Ken Robinson, because the way, many professionals would say, no, he kept doing these non sequiturs. But that's his style, and that works for some people, like Peter Griffith. Was that Family Guy?
Family
Guy. You've seen that narrative, and then these complete non sequiturs come in, but then he's right back on track. So for him, it works, and I've seen him present a dozen times actually. There's many different talks on education, and that's his style. He knows what he's going to talk about. He has this idea in his head, these kind of pillars. But he says presentation is a lot like jazz. So, and I'm a jazz drummer, and I play with a lot of guys. I have since I was a kid, and we know the song. Play Green Dolphin Street. We all know Green Dolphin Street. But each time it's going to be a little different, depending on the musicians and depending on the audience. So that's his style. So for me, I have to say, that's the one I've seen the most. And although, again, it's not classic in terms of, be like that guy, but it's very natural and very real. And it's entertaining and also informative. And it's a number one download.
I think my favorite is Jill Bolte-Taylor's talk. I remember it was the very first time I went to TED. She was the very first talk, and I was completely overwhelmed, thinking, how am I going to endure 3 days of this? Completely overwhelmed. And I think, one, she's a female, and she's analytic, so we just talk about engineers and all this stuff. So she's a scientist, super high-stakes presentation. She has 18 minutes, and she studied strokes and stroke behavior all her life, and then she observed herself having a stroke. And so she tells what that's like. She uses these great hand gestures when she talks about nirvana, and as her body was shutting down. If you just even watch her, the way she communicates, just physicality of it, I thought was just lovely and very clean. So take an analytic person and put him in a high-stakes situation, and she pulled it off. It's just beautiful.
That talk's a great example of unexpectedness, too, where she did use some PowerPoint, some slides, and then herself, and she had a demo, so she wanted to show the 2 parts of the brain and the corpus callosum and all that. A lot of people do that, and they might use a model brain or a slide, and she used an actual human brain, and she pulled it out with the spinal cord.
And it was trippy on the floor.
And the whole audience, you can hear it. It's a great example. If you haven't seen it, and the whole audience, you can hear the audience just, that's emotion. It's unexpectedness, and it was relevant. It wasn't a superfluous point.
Very good.
So, I mean, I don't suggest you should bring a live brain around with you. Oh, the dead
Unless you
brain.
wanted to gas.
Yeah. But the whole, we say it too much, but the Heath Brothers thing with those
The
6
Made the
principles,
Stick, yeah.
Made the Stick book is I don't know if it's a great book. Some people say it's not a very interesting book, but those 6 principles are really solid. They're commonsensical. But if you had those 6, at least as a minimum, a lot of presentations would be much better.
Very good.
Okay, here's a question that is probably more from the standpoint of what goes on in a regular day for both of you. How do you stay focused and effective with the constant barrage of information and asks coming at you?
I mean, that's a question relevant for everyone here.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's the 64 million. What do people say now? I don't know.
I don't know.
I've been away for 20 years. But I'll have Nancy go first.
Oh, I wasn't going to go
Oh,
first.
no? I forgot what the
Raj,
question
we're both
was.
Raj. I think we started the whole conversation with how in the world are you staying inspired to write or do the things you have when we're just so busy in the demands of the day. And I get really jealous of my time. And when I have a creative idea, like I'm working on 2 ideas right now, I get really jealous of my time. I feel like if I end the day and I didn't get to write something thoughtful, I feel like I didn't truly live that day. So I get really jealous of my calendar. If I'm in a mode where I need to be creative, I start crack of dawn. I'm in between 6 and 7 a.m. I block my calendar, no interruptions. I don't answer the phone, and I keep email off until around 11 to 11:30. And then I do my real job from 11:30 to the end of the day. And I know that doesn't work for everyone. I also know most parking lots around here don't fill up till about 9 a.m. So if you really want to do something great, you have an idea that's going to change the world, you may have to make some sacrifice to do that between 6 and 9 in the morning or something like that before your first meeting kicks in. Sad to say it, but that's sometimes the sacrifice it makes. But I turn things off. Nobody has my cell phone number but my children. So when I get a text, and my husband, so when I get a text or something like that, it would either have to be an emergency from someone here, nobody has my cell number but my family. So I have had to draw some limits around that.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone is a morning person. In Dr. Medina's Brain Rules book, he talks about that. But companies, the whole infrastructure around the world, is this sort of 9 to 5. But not everyone is like that. Actually, I am a morning person, really early, but I also am a night person. This is a bad combination. And I would like to sleep in the middle of the day. It's cool to be up and you can watch Letterman and then go do something else. But there's something about the early morning, as you know. And I've heard of some companies in the Valley that, I forget what company it was, but they found they basically didn't get anything really done after lunch. And the real work was, and they were 8 o'clock to 12 or so. And then they would do 80% of their work really in that time. So they just said, screw it, let's not really do the afternoon stuff anymore then, and go play golf or whatever. And
That's not how we do it here.
I have for years been trying to adopt Spanish cultural rules here. Basically would follow that exactly.
Yeah.
And I'd be perfectly fine with that.
Yeah,
About your siesta?
in many countries, I think it's Vietnam, but they might have a long lunch break of a couple of hours and people will sleep on the desk or anything. It's just sort of inhumane. It's inhumane in sort of way. Not here. This is what a beautiful office you have. But not everyone is a morning person. So I forget what the question was. But fine. But yes, busyness. I think the problem isn't being busy. Being busy is good, but busyness is a scourge. And that idea of running around like a chicken.
You do 2 jobs. He's a teacher. You're a public speaker. And you're an author. And that's what I grapple with.
And
Right?
more
I don't just
importantly,
have one. I have a dad.
Yeah, I'm a father of a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And they call it ikumen in Japanese, because to be a father who takes time with their kids is like a new concept. So some younger guys are doing that. So there's a name for it.
Right.
It means like macho man or something, going man. But that's we were talking about that, because inspiration and running on the beach and all that thing has always been important to me. But when you have kids, as many of you know, that just saps your time and energy like no one's business. And it's great. You can't complain about that. It's a wonderful thing. But the reality is it takes energy away. So, yeah, I would be much more productive without children. But I think Guy Kawasaki has said that. He said that he said that about his wife. He goes, this book would have been finished a lot sooner if I wasn't married. But it wouldn't be nearly as good. So he was crediting his wife was making it better, but it took longer. So I kind of say that about my kids. So hopefully, the kids are inspiring, but yeah, it takes a lot of energy.
Here's a question that just came in. I think it's something that we'd all like to hear about because obviously the environment that we work within is constantly changing. The technology changes. So what do you see as the future evolution for presentation technology? What's on your wish list?
Sorry, that went crazy there.
I'm going to take a drink of a lovely beverage.
What's on my wish list?
This is Duarte mug, by the way.
He's so cute. My wish list. We're trying to work on that. We're trying to reimagine what's going to happen. I think visual conversations, or you're kind of hearing some of that, kind of this visual memo or sending out documents instead of sending out presentations. I'm looking for the presentation that's totally immersive, and I don't know what that means. Like, why don't we use the sense of smell? Like, if we're really making a point, or we're talking about oil refineries, why aren't we pumping in, like, who knows, right? How can we engage more of the senses? How can we have it surround us to where we're actually enveloped in it? How can we let the narrative go the direction that I want it to go? Just because the speaker is an expert and they're saying what they think I need to hear, how do I make it so I can send a signal to a speaker so they know to redirect or make it more interesting, or how do you have these complex narratives, and how do you navigate them based on the needs of the audience? It's all interesting to me, and I hope technology can deliver.
Yeah, I mean that's a big question. I still think we haven't gone. Bandwidth is just finally where we can have HD, really nice presentation videos that not just that TED makes, but that just regular people without that much money are putting online. I found one recently called a Filmmaker IQ by a guy named John Hess. I think he's in LA. And it's really high quality stuff. Some of the videos he did, it's just in his little office or his room, but it looks totally better than anything Apple ever produced 10 years ago, their internal training stuff. But there's lots of stuff like that online, but most people still don't think they can produce stuff like that.
Yeah.
So producing stuff in your room, basically, or at home, doing video presentations that are high quality, that you learn how to edit. So I deal with high schools a little bit, and what kids love are doing the multimedia stuff.
Yeah.
And we always did that, but it was just sort of playing with things. But now they're producing really good content. It's always been about the content, but the tools sort of slowed us down. But now you can produce really good stuff, even just using iMovie.
What's funny, I presented to some VCs a couple of weeks ago, and the main owner of this kind of tier 1 VC firm, he goes, I can tell now when a deck comes in the age of the person who created it. Yeah, it was really interesting. He goes, I know if they are under 23, it's got a story and compelling visuals, and if they're over 23, it's crap. So I was like, wow, kind of to your digital native, as the digital natives start to rise up, they're going to give us all a run for the money, and it's going to get really interesting soon. So we need to be on our toes.
Yeah, there's something called Haiku Deck. Have you heard of it? Have you seen that? And they use Creative Commons. I haven't used it yet. They keep
It's really cute.
bugging me to use. I will, because what I've seen, he keeps things very, very simple. And some people say, okay, it's too simple. You can't do that for science or whatever. But what it does is it forces them to actually speak in the actual presentation. They have to know what they're talking about. Because they're not just putting something up there and reading it. This is what's so funny, because a lot of science professors, all the professors around me basically would think, oh, it's got to have lots of text, because that's dense and that means they know what they're talking about. But you can easily, let's say you're doing a marketing presentation on Starbucks, because that would be common. Okay, do a marketing thing and the company will be Starbucks. You can just put that in Google, .ppt, and take someone else, there's a million of them already up there, and then change it slightly. You don't have to know what you're talking about if you're just reading a bunch of bullet points. So in a way, a Haiku Deck or something like that forces the students to really know the material and answer questions and have a discussion about things, and the visual could be quite simple.
Absolutely. Very cool.
I don't work for Haiku Deck. That's one that came to mind. I don't really care about the technology part of it.
But one thing I was going to mention with VCs, you talked about VCs a moment ago. I've heard VCs tell me and others that they're as invested into the individual as they are to the idea. And most of the time, they're going to invest into the person because they believe in them, who happens to have a good idea. And so I think it's important, what you were saying, you have to know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you're not going to win over that audience.
Yeah, a lot of people, they fuss so much about the deck, and this is from the 90s, but they still do it, and students talk to me about this. But if you talk to people like David Rose, David S. Rose, the venture capitalist guy in New York, he goes, we see him at TED. That's what he says. We're really investing in the person. Yep. So a great example of one is when let's say the computer freezes.
Yeah.
If you're using Windows, that can happen. Or Apple. Or anything. I mean, it can happen. Or any technologies, stuff happens. But if you just say, okay, well, the computer froze or the projector doesn't work, and then go to a whiteboard or just start talking, that has happened. There have been cases when you've really impressed them now. You know what you're talking about, plus you can handle problems. There's another story where they were pitching to Guy Kawasaki, and this young guy, and the projector didn't work. So he starts saying, stop, and they start fussing with it. And Kawasaki says, I hope you know this doesn't bode well for you. And these younger people were like, oh, he's such a a-hole. How could you be so mean? But they didn't get it. That's what a great opportunity that was to say, screw it, and let me just tell you my idea. Because you can't ask this 50-year-old guy sitting around who's busy to wait for you to fix a projector. Because it's not about the slides and the projector. You're here. Are we going to give you money?
Yeah.
What's your idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's still some questions that we can go through, but before we do that, because we're getting towards the end of our hour, I wanted to do some giveaways. So I wanted to bring over maybe the stack of Garr stuff there. So you brought a bunch of items with you. What do we want to give away?
Do we want to collect more business cards or anything?
These are
Do people?
my
you guys
publisher,
have
Peach
business
Pit Press. Karen
Pass them
and
to the
Sarah
row.
are in the room
Do you have
someplace
business
from
cards
Peach
you
Pit
want?
Press. So they brought those over.
So maybe what we can, everyone just want to give a few or just one large set of items to one person?
Sure. Everyone gets something. We just pulling stuff up and then they.
Okay,
This
perfect.
person gets.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
so we're
I
going
want
to...
to give
Okay, so as these are coming in, here's what we're going to do. We're going to, in just a moment, I'm going to let both Garr and Nancy be the folks that draw the names out.
We're not going to contact you, by the way. This isn't to get your information. Don't worry about that. It's literally to win something and we'll toss your card.
That's right.
I'm coming over tonight.
This isn't about marketing. And so what we want to do, though, is just a little gift, or several little gifts for the people that have come, in some cases as far as Boston or just in the Bay Area or other places here in the U.S., and want to give you a chance to walk away with something that you can physically hold on to and remember today from. And so why don't we do this? Do we have...
Yes.
Oh, they're collecting over here.
They were shuffling them, so I'm sure you talked about data and all of that later. So there's some statistics.
So why don't we start with you, Garr? Just go ahead and pick one.
It's
it opens.
scary. Very Bayer in German. Isn't that in Deutsch?
Is it Bayer?
Is it Bayer, German? Andy Cheng? Andy.
All right, so this is, for me, this is a little bit of a dream come true because when I was a kid, I used to watch The Price is Right all the time.
Okay, so work it.
And I wanted to be Johnny Olsen, so yeah.
Come on, thank you, Andy.
All right, so go ahead and
Nancy.
have you, Nancy, go ahead and draw one here.
We got, who did that? I met him earlier. The focal point, Aaron Steinstra.
Aaron, come on down over here.
Come on down.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, you got a book and a sketchbook. Fantastic.
Nancy.
Okay, can I take another one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Eric Wise.
Eric Wise. I like that reaction.
That's their Price is Right.
That's right. Pretty soon we're going to ask you how much all these items cost, and whoever comes to
And we have also from Bayer, we got Andy. How many times did we put his back
What?
in there?
Hey, wait a sec.
Wait, another three
Double blind here, guys.
We got Tiffany, Stu.
Tiffany, we're back there.
Service desk
Fantastic.
manager.
And what is that? Did you finish up the bento box?
bento box.
Oh, fantastic. So, okay, we're going to move on to a few others.
You can sell that on eBay later. Rick will set you up.
All right, so Nancy, do you want to draw? Or did you just drew one? So
Yeah.
Garr will let you draw.
Okay. All right, this is Norm Hartman.
Norm, fantastic. So,
From PMT Worldwide.
those are Resonate and HBR. So I think those are signed. We have one last one. I think Nancy wanted to give us one
Yeah,
away.
I wanted to give it to our farthest traveling and youngest participant, Ava. Is she here? She look at this. Come on up here. There's a story in here about a 13-year-old girl who did a presentation. I want to thank you for coming out. That's super nice. Thank you.
I think we have a couple ebooks we can give away also. So the way this will work is if you are the lucky winner, you'll just come in and talk to Ashley up here, and she will give you a little card that allows you to download the ebook. And I think they probably work for iPads and maybe...
Mine only works on an iPad.
Okay. So go ahead and
you don't have an iPad, let us
3
know.
more. Let's go 3 more.
Photo trainer, learn from a pro.
That's me.
That's your name. Tom.
Okay, next one is Ian Griffin,
Are you here?
Executive Communications.
Ian, come on down.
Yay, Ian.
And last one, yes. We'll do one more.
I'll take the last one. Here we go. It is a piece of paper that says J. Sham. Congratulations. From Stanford.
Okay, we're in our last few minutes, and there was one question that I thought might be kind of interesting to just get a high-level perspective on, and it's going to lead me into the final question for the day as well. This one is just simply, please talk about the process of writing your first books and how you developed the relationship with the publisher.
Do I have to keep it clean?
Yeah. This is for posterity, so
Well,
probably
big part of
cleanish.
my process was getting talked into it, and then one of the pieces of value a publisher gives you is a deadline, which is always important. So, my book is, I always do my books on my wall. I don't know why. I think because I'm just visual, so I put it all up on the wall, and then as I read it, I put new pages up there. I think it's because I'm kind of strapped in a slide mindset. I don't know if you guys noticed, but all my books have, each spread has a title and content that supports that title, so it was easy for me to move them around like index cards almost. And so that was kind of my creative process. And I'm a bit of a publisher slut because I've had 3 of them. So the first publisher was anyone who would have me. The second publisher was the one who pursued me and made me a lot of false promises of, oh my God, we're gonna skin Amazon with your look and feel, and then oh my gosh, we're gonna buy up and we're gonna do this massive press release. We're gonna host all the blah blah blah. Oh my gosh! And so I jumped in with them, and then you get there. It's like, well, do I write the press release or do you write? Oh, we don't do press releases. We found them ineffective now. Okay, do I skin Amazon or do you skin it? No, we don't do that anymore. We found that ineffective. And I was just like, what are you going to do for me? And so that one didn't go so well. But then when Harvard Business Review, such a prestigious name and brand, and they asked me to do tips and tricks. Like, if your boss broke her leg and wanted you to present in 2 hours, what's the book you got from the shelf? I'm like, okay, I'll do that. It was kind of a low-hanging fruit one, but wow, it was so nice to work with a real publisher for the first time, a real editor. I mean, I get it. And she's like, I've done a first pass at the outline for your book. I'm like, oh my God, how nice is this? So it's been interesting. Every publisher is different, and your relationship with them is different. All my publishers, but HBR, my editors moved on. So I'm actually meeting with an agent on Friday to see if it's different to have an agent involved, a big New York agent. So it'll be interesting to see. I've got friends that do have a great job. They get these $100 zillion things. They get $65,000 for press. They get all the stuff from the big publishers. But maybe we'll get that one day. But not when I'm sleeping with the ones I'm sleeping with. It's interesting.
Yeah, I've been. Here's how it goes. So many of you maybe you're interested in writing a book, and I think that is a good idea. People still do read books, and even if the book breaks even or only makes a little bit of money for you, it's the credibility thing, it's the takeaway thing. So there's actually a buddy of mine named Seth Godin who said many years ago, get the book because it's a brochure. If nothing else, it's just your leave behind. So that was my mentality that I started in 2005 with blogging. But I didn't think blogging was like, taking a bath now. It's like what Twitter is, But I would actually research things and then a bit longer and then, linkable and all this stuff. And then what happens is after you get a following and you're writing, and you don't write it to get a following, you write it because you just want to make a contribution. Yeah. And then you do that and you get people following, you get interest. And then 3 or 4 publishers came to me over the years, and one of them was Peach Pit Press. And I'd always been a fan of Peach Pit Press because I read their books. I was a Mac guy and a design guy, so I knew who they were. They're in Berkeley.
He's been way more faithful to
Yes, and I'm still with them.
They're here.
In spite of offers from other attractive, people.
People who try to lure you with false
Partially it's
promises.
because I'm lazy. And I think there's still something about having a publisher. I know a lot of my friends who are really successful authors have stopped using publishers,
Right.
and they've done their own, like Guy, but there are others.
And so.
Yeah, and there are other friends of mine, novelists too, who turned down $500,000 advance, turned it down to do his own, because in the long run he'll make more money and make more points. But I still think there's something to a publisher, because since anyone can publish a book, there's almost something in terms of credibility to having a big publisher.
Well, they put it in distribution for sure.
Yeah, and for me it's the deadline thing. So I need someone to have a gun to my head and push me in. And I have a great editor too, and editing there's a lot of self-published books that need an editor. And I don't like that, because if I'm going to spend money for a book, I want it to be well edited and thought out.
We had to pay for our own editor when I went with Wiley, another promise.
So the moral of the story, though, if you're thinking, if you have a unique twist, a little look at the world, start making a website and start blogging faithfully and giving the content away, and then you may get the interest of a publisher that way.
My husband, who I'm trying to get to blog. So. Did you hear that, hon?
But the thing about blogging, it's like advertising. I mean, you can't just do it once in a while. It's got to be constant.
It's a monster. You have to
the
keep
spirit.
going.
Some people write a book and then think, okay, I'll blog to market it. And that's the wrong way around it. You blog or you have a website because you want to make a contribution to the industry, whatever industry that is. And then you think, okay, I'll just, I'll make a book because people want a book. Yeah. And then if it sells, great. And it's a cyclical thing. Yeah. But I don't think it works the other way around, although I know people do it, where they'll write a book to make money. And I think I'll blog to promote that. But
last question, and it's something we probably, again, all want to hear a bit about. I know you're working on some new ideas. You talked about it briefly earlier. Garr, I can only assume that you've got something else brewing up in your brain. And so I'm curious if you can give us a sneak peek into what's next. What do you have going on now?
I'm working on a short-term piece about using PowerPoint to create your documents. We've pushed everyone towards cinematic, and I'm going to try to push people towards understanding the value of how modular and amazing it is as a document tool. To visualize these short-form documents. So that's going to come out pretty soon in the fall.
And how about for you?
There are 3 books in the works, but the first one coming out in December, if I finish it. It's just the second edition of Presentations and Design, updated, a new chapter, and there'll be new samples. So actually, this is for some of you who are in the room who may be designers of, if you have some decks or something that you've done, something that you own the copyright to, and have permission. If you would like to be featured in that book, then please contact me. Always Nancy has a few decks in there and some other things. But I like to promote other people as well if I can. So if you have something interesting. And then I'll do a storybook eventually next year. But the book I'm really excited about
is about stories.
Yeah, I don't want to say the title because I'll give it away. But the book I'm really excited about is the Be Like Bamboo book, which will be sort of positioned for thought leadership. But it's about resilience. And the metaphor of bamboo, it's beautiful stuff. I know some Americans think it's just an awful weed, but in Asia it has more of a... We value it as something sort of almost sacred. And we have a big forest out behind our house. And, bamboo looks small and fragile, but it's not. It can withstand any windstorm. It's really amazing stuff. So that's the metaphor for resilience, something that Japanese know very well. And the human spirit actually is an amazing, resilient thing. So that's the book that I'm, I think, probably most excited about, coming out later next year.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for all your time. We're basically at the end of our time now, and so thank you for being part of it. Let's go ahead and give Garr and Nancy a big round of applause.